The chandelier at Celeste Dining dripped light like liquid diamonds, each crystal droplet a silent testament to a world Amelia Rousseau served but could never inhabit. From the shadows of a velvet-draped alcove, Julian Thorne watched her, not as the restaurant's clandestine owner, but as a predator studies its prey. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible weariness in her smile, a smile she offered to the boisterous table of men in the center of the room. It was 1 a.m. The main dinner service was long over, but this table, a party of 4, lingered over $100 brandies, their laughter echoing with the brittle sound of entitlement. Amelia, or Mia, as her name tag read, moved with a grace that defied the grueling hours she'd already worked. He had been tracking her movements for the last hour, a strange, obsessive exercise born of a boredom so profound it had become its own kind of pain. He'd seen her handle a spilled wine glass with swift, apologetic efficiency, her voice a low murmur of reassurance. He'd watched her describe the dessert menu with a vocabulary that suggested a palate far more refined than her station would imply. But it was the little things that snagged his attention. The way she instinctively adjusted a slightly crooked painting on the wall as she passed, a micro-correction no one else would ever notice. The way her eyes, a deep, tired blue, didn't just see the patrons but observed them, cataloguing the scuff on a shoe, the fraying cuff of a supposedly bespoke shirt. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a curator of details in a museum of fleeting moments. The man at the head of the table, Marcus Vance, snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp, a whip crack in the hushed elegance of the room. Girl, more brandy. And this time, don't take a scenic tour of the restaurant to get it. Julian's jaw tightened. He knew Marcus Vance. Vance was a senior vice president at Thorne Industries, a relic from his grandfather's era, a man whose ambition was matched only by his crudeness. He represented everything Julian was trying to purge from the company, the old guard mentality that saw people as either assets or obstacles. Mia's smile didn't falter, but Julian, an expert in masks, saw the light in her eyes dim for a fraction of a second. "Of course, sir. Right away." As she turned, another man at the table, his face flushed with alcohol, reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey, what's the hurry? Sit with us. Tell us your story. I bet it's a sad one." Mia froze. A genuine flicker of fear crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. She gently tried to pull her arm away. "Sir, I can't. I'm working." "Oh, come on," Vance drawled, swirling his brandy. "Don't be a spoil sport. Roger here is just trying to be friendly. We're paying a fortune to be here. The least you can do is entertain us." That was the moment the detached observation curdled into something else. Julian had built his empire on control, on the cold, hard logic of numbers and market trends. He hadn't felt the hot, primitive surge of protective anger in years. He started to rise from his seat, the social contract be damned, when Mia spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the haze of alcohol and arrogance with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Sir," she said, her eyes fixed on the man holding her wrist, "your Patek Philippe Calatrava is a beautiful timepiece. The 18-carat rose gold case is exquisite, but the pressure you're applying to my wrist is likely to scratch the finish against the button of my cuff. I'm sure you wouldn't want to damage such a valuable investment." The man, Roger, blinked, his drunken brain struggling to process the information. He instinctively looked down at his multi-thousand-dollar watch and loosened his grip. Maya smoothly retrieved her hand. "I'll get that brandy for you now," she said, her professional mask perfectly in place once more, and walked away toward the bar. The table was silent for a beat, momentarily stunned. Then Vance let out a bark of laughter. "Well, I'll be damned. The little waitress has claws, and a good eye for watches." Julian sank back into his seat, his mind racing. It wasn't just claws, it was intelligence. It was observation turned into a weapon of de-escalation. She hadn't pleaded or panicked. She had assessed the situation, identified her captor's vanity, and used his own status symbol as leverage. In that moment, Amelia Russo ceased to be a subject of detached curiosity. She became an anomaly, a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. He waited. He watched her deliver the brandy, her movements fluid and unhurried. He watched her clear other tables, her focus absolute. Finally, as the clock neared 2 a.m., Vance and his party lumbered out, leaving a mess of glasses and a paltry tip in their wake. Mia cleared it without a change in expression. The restaurant slowly emptied until only the cleaning crew and a few lingering staff remained. Mia disappeared into the back. Julian assumed she was clocking out, heading home. He paid his bill in cash, leaving a tip that would make a mortgage payment, and walked out into the cool night air. His driver pulled the obsidian Rolls-Royce to the curb, but Julian held up a hand. "Wait here, Thomas." He found himself walking around the block, the encounter replaying in his mind. He wasn't a white knight. He didn't save people. He acquired assets, managed risk and eliminated liabilities. People were, more often than not, liabilities. Yet, he couldn't shake the image of her calm, intelligent defiance. On a whim, he circled back to the restaurant service alley. The door was propped open, a sliver of yellow light cutting through the darkness. He heard the rhythmic clatter of dishes. Peering through the gap, he saw her. She had changed out of her uniform into a simple t-shirt and jeans, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. But she wasn't washing dishes. She was sitting at a small metal table under a bare bulb, a jeweler's loupe pressed to one eye. In her hands, she held one of the restaurant's antique silver forks, carefully, painstakingly, polishing away a minuscule patch of tarnish with a soft cloth and a small jar of paste. Her concentration was absolute, a scholar poring over a sacred text. This was not a waitress killing time. This was a craftsman at work. He pushed the door open. The metallic groan made her jump, the loupe dropping from her eye. She looked up, startled, her tired blue eyes widening in recognition. The wary professional mask snapped back into place. "Sir, can I help you?" "The restaurant is closed." "I know," Julian said, stepping into the small, cluttered space. It smelled of bleach and old grease. "My name is Julian Thorne." He saw no flicker of recognition. To her, he was just the quiet man from the corner booth. "Good. I saw what happened earlier," he continued, his voice softer than he intended. "With Vance's party, you handled it well." A shrug. "It's part of the job." "No," he said, stepping closer. "It's not. What you did required a specific skill set. Observation, poise under pressure, the ability to assess a vulnerability and exploit it without aggression." He paused, gesturing to the fork in her hand. "And this is not part of the job." Her gaze dropped to the fork. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "The dishwashers are rough. The silver is from the 1890s, Gorham Chantilly pattern. If you don't take care of it, the detail work is lost forever. I do it when my shift is over. They let me stay late." "Why?" he asked. The question was abrupt, but it was the only one that mattered. Mia began packing her polishing supplies into a small canvas bag, her movements neat and economical. She wouldn't meet his eye. "I need the money." "The restaurant pays you to polish antique silver at 3 a.m? His tone was skeptical. He knew exactly what the staff payroll was. It didn't include artisan-level restoration work. She finally looked up, and for the first time, he saw the raw exhaustion she had been hiding all night. It was etched into the fine lines around her eyes, in the faint tremor of her hands. The manager lets me stay. The cleaning crew is here anyway. He looks the other way. I sell some things online, small restorations, polishing. I have a blog about identifying antique silver marks. She hesitated. It's not much, but it helps. Helps with what? Julian pressed, his cynicism warring with a burgeoning, unfamiliar emotion. He was used to people asking him for things, their motives as transparent as glass. But she wasn't asking for anything. She was just working. Endlessly. Tears welled in her eyes, and she blinked them back with a fury that twisted his insides. "My mother," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's sick. She has a degenerative neurological condition. The medication, the physical therapy, insurance calls most of it experimental. So I work. Here. And then here again." The story wasn't unique. He'd heard 1,000 variations of it at charity galas and foundation meetings, but it had never been delivered by a woman with silver polish on her fingertips at 3 a.m., a woman who could identify a Patek Philippe and an 1890s Gorham fork with equal precision. He made a decision. It was illogical, impulsive, and violated every one of his personal rules about emotional entanglement. He pulled a business card from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was heavy cardstock, the lettering a simple, severe black. Julian Thorne, CEO, Thorne Industries. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Russo," he said, his voice all business now, a shield against the unfamiliar territory he was charting. "It's not charity. It's a job. I have a collection of family heirlooms, documents, archives that have been criminally neglected. I need someone to catalogue, research, and restore them. Someone with an eye for detail. Someone meticulous. Someone who understands the value of things that have been forgotten." She stared at the card, then back at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and deep-seated suspicion. "You want to hire me? To polish your silver?" "I want to hire you for your mind, Miss Russo," he corrected her. "For that brain that identified a watch as a weakness and a fork as a piece of history. The polishing is just a symptom of the talent." He named a salary that made her gasp, a figure that was 6 times what she could possibly make in a year of endless shifts. "Full health benefits are included. The best. We can have our corporate medical liaison review your mother's case immediately." She recoiled as if he'd struck her. "I don't understand." "Why? You don't know me. I know that you stayed late to care for something that wasn't yours because you believed it had value. I know you faced down 4 drunk, powerful men with nothing but your intellect. That's more than I know about half the people on my executive board." He placed the card on the metal table between them. "My assistant Clara will call you tomorrow at 9. Be ready to give her your answer. Your first assignment, should you accept, will be at the Thorne Industries headquarters. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement." He turned and walked away before she could argue, before she could refuse, before he could second-guess the most irrational decision of his life. As he stepped back into the silent alley, he heard her whisper a single, broken word into the empty kitchen. Why? He didn't have an answer. Not a logical one, anyway. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, the crushing weight of his own boredom had lifted, replaced by a consuming, electrifying curiosity. The phone call came at 9:01 a.m. Maya was sitting at the tiny kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her mother, a stack of overdue medical bills serving as a placemat for her untouched cup of coffee. Her mother, Elena, was in the other room, the soft sounds of the television a constant backdrop to their lives. "Amelia Russo." The voice on the phone was crisp, efficient, and exuded a calm authority that Mia associated with doctors delivering bad news. "This is she. My name is Clara Vance. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Julian Thorne. He asked me to follow up with you regarding a potential employment opportunity." Mia's hand tightened on her phone. Clara Vance. The last name was a jolt. Any relation to Marcus Vance? The question was out before she could stop it. There was a half-second of icy silence. "He is my uncle. Is that a problem?" "No, of course not," Mia stammered, feeling foolish. "Good. Mr. Thorne has offered you the position of archival consultant for the Thorne Family Foundation. The salary and benefits he mentioned are correct. A car will be sent to your address at 10:30 to bring you to the Thorne Tower for onboarding and to sign your NDA. Will you be accepting the position?" Mia looked at the pile of bills. She thought of her mother's last visit to the neurologist, the quiet, pained look on the doctor's face as he explained that the next phase of treatment would be even more expensive and even less likely to be covered by insurance. She thought of the antique silver fork, the satisfying feeling of bringing beauty back from the brink of decay. "Yes," Mia said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I accept." An hour and a half later, a black Lincoln Navigator, so clean it seemed to absorb the light, was waiting outside her modest Queen's apartment building. The ride into Manhattan was a surreal journey into another dimension. The Thorne Tower was a shard of glass and steel that pierced the sky, a monument to a level of wealth she couldn't truly comprehend. She was met in the lobby by Clara Vance. In person, she was even more formidable, a woman in her late 40s with severe, intelligent features and an impeccably tailored grey suit. There was no warmth in her greeting, only a brisk professionalism that bordered on disdain. "Ms. Russo." "Follow me." They rode a silent, high-speed elevator to the 80th floor. The doors opened onto a space that was less an office and more a private museum. Polished marble floors, walls adorned with art that Mia recognized as major works by abstract expressionists, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city. Julian Thorne was standing by the window, speaking quietly into his phone. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed molded to his frame. He looked up as they entered, his grey eyes meeting hers. He ended his call without a goodbye. "Mia," he said, a simple acknowledgement that felt strangely intimate. "Welcome to Thorne Industries. Clara will handle your paperwork. Your workspace is this way." He led her not to a cubicle or a sterile office, but to a room off his main suite that looked like a scholar's dream. One wall was lined with antique books, another with climate-controlled archival cabinets. In the center was a large, heavy oak table, bathed in light from a window overlooking Central Park. "This was my grandfather's study," Julian explained. "He was the historian of the family, the real founder. Everything he collected, every document, photograph, and piece of memorabilia from the last 150 years of my family's history is in this room. It's a mess, uncatalogued, unpreserved. Your job is to make sense of it, to find the story in the noise." Mia ran a hand over the spine of a leather-bound ledger. It felt like coming home. "Where do I start?" "Wherever you want," he said. "This is your domain. You report only to me." He paused. "Clara has the contact information for Dr. Aris Thorne, head of the Thorne Medical Research Division. He is my second cousin and one of the world's leading neurologists. He is expecting your call. He will oversee your mother's case personally." The blunt generosity of it was disarming. "Mr. Thorne, Julian, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he said, his tone sharp again, the professional mask back in place. "Just do the job I hired you for. Prove my judgment was sound." And so her new life began. The first few weeks were a blur of overwhelming gratitude and intense work. She called Dr. Aris Thorne, a kind, brilliant man who immediately had her mother admitted to a private research hospital for a full diagnostic workup. For the first time in years, Mia felt a sliver of hope for Elena's future. At work, she dove into the Thorne family archives with a passion that bordered on obsession. It was a treasure trove. She found letters from presidents, stock certificates from the Gilded Age, photographs of stern-faced men and women who had built an empire from scratch. She discovered that Julian's great-grandmother was a talented artist, her work dismissed and forgotten by the men who ran the family. Mia carefully began to catalogue and preserve the small, delicate canvases, feeling a kinship with the woman lost to history. Her interactions with Julian were brief and professional. He would check in on her progress, his questions sharp and insightful. He seemed pleased with her work, with the meticulous order she was imposing on his family's chaotic past. But there was a distance between them, a carefully maintained boundary. The only friction came from Clara Vance. Marcus Vance's niece made her disapproval of Mia's presence clear in 1,000 small ways. A forgotten coffee order, a delayed security pass, a condescending remark about Mia's qualifications. Mia ignored it, focusing on her work. She was used to being underestimated. One rainy Tuesday, about a month into her new job, she was working on a collection of old corporate ledgers from the 1970s. She was looking for information on a specific subsidiary company, a name she'd seen crop up repeatedly. To do that, she needed access to the main corporate art inventory records, as the subsidiary had been involved in acquiring pieces for the company's collection. Clara procured the files for her with a sigh, dropping a heavy binder on her desk. "Don't take too long with this. The executive wing is being recarpeted next week, and everything needs to be in its place," Clara said dismissively. Mia spent the afternoon cross-referencing the ledgers with the art inventory. The work was tedious but satisfying. As she was finishing up, she noticed a discrepancy, a notation about a painting, a 19th-century seascape by a minor but respected Hudson River School artist that was listed as being in storage, but which she was certain she had seen hanging on a wall somewhere. Curiosity piqued, she scrolled through the digital photos in the inventory file. There it was. Storm Over the Palisades by Jasper Finch. The photo matched the painting she'd seen. But where? She closed her eyes, mentally walking the halls of the 80th floor. Julian's office. No. The main boardroom. No. The reception area. No. Then it hit her. It was in Marcus Vance's office. She'd seen it through his open door a few days ago when she was walking to the kitchenette. It was a dark, brooding piece. Not to her taste, but memorable. It was a small thing, a clerical error most likely. But it bothered her. Mia had an almost photographic memory for details, and things being out of place were like a dissonant chord in a symphony. She made a note of it in her personal logbook, a tiny, nagging question mark in the back of her mind. Later that week, Julian called her into his office. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes drawn tight. "My grandfather is coming to the office on Friday," he said without preamble. "Arthur Thorne, the patriarch. He's difficult. He doesn't approve of many of my decisions, including the creation of your position. He believes the past should stay buried." "What do you want me to do?" Mia asked. "I want you to prepare a presentation. I want you to show him what you've found. Specifically, the letters and journals of my great-grandmother, Eleanor Vance Thorne." Mia's eyes widened. "The artist? But her work. It's so personal." "Exactly," Julian said. "Arthur's mother was Eleanor's daughter. He adored his mother, but he never knew his grandmother. Eleanor was erased from the family history after her husband's death. They thought her art was an unseemly hobby. I want you to show him what they threw away. I want him to see that value isn't always on a balance sheet." He looked at her, his grey eyes intense. "He will try to intimidate you. He will dismiss you. Do not let him." The challenge was clear. This wasn't just about archives. It was a test, and it was a direct confrontation with the Thorne family's old guard, the same world that had produced Marcus and Clara Vance. The name echoed in her mind. Eleanor Vance Thorne. She was a Vance before she married a Thorne. The web was more tangled than she had imagined. On Friday morning, Arthur Thorne arrived. He was a man in his late 80s, but he moved with the predatory stillness of a hawk. He looked just like the old photographs in the archives, only his eyes, a piercing grey like his grandson's, were colder, harder. He was flanked by Marcus Vance, who wore a smug, proprietary air. They entered the study, and Mia felt a chill despite the room's warmth. Arthur Thorne's gaze swept over her, a swift, brutal appraisal that dismissed her in a single glance. "So this is the girl you've hired to play with old papers," Arthur said to Julian, his voice a gravelly rumble. "A waitress from Queens." Before Julian could respond, Mia stepped forward. "My name is Amelia Russo, Mr. Thorne, and I am not playing. I am recovering your family's history. Specifically, the history of your grandmother, Eleanor Vance Thorne." She began her presentation. She laid out the journals, the letters, the beautifully preserved sketches. She had even brought up one of the smaller canvases from the climate-controlled storage. She spoke of Eleanor's passion, her talent, her frustration with a world that wouldn't take her seriously. She read a passage from a journal where Eleanor described the joy of capturing the light on the Hudson River, the very same view they could see from the office window. Arthur Thorne was silent, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Marcus Vance, however, looked bored and irritated. "This is sentimental nonsense," Marcus interjected. "We're running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not an art gallery. This girl is a distraction." "She is an asset," Julian countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "She has brought more clarity to our foundation's history in 6 weeks than anyone has in 60 years. "An asset?" Marcus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "She's a liability, a charity case your bleeding heart couldn't resist. How's your mother, dear?" he asked, turning to Mia with a cruel smile. "Still enjoying the Thorne family's generosity?" The personal attack was so vicious, so unexpected, it stole her breath. She felt the blood drain from her face. She saw a flash of white-hot rage in Julian's eyes. But then, the old man, Arthur Thorne, spoke. He hadn't taken his eyes off the small painting on the table. It was a simple still life of 3 lemons in a blue bowl. "My mother had a painting just like this in her bedroom," he said, his voice thick with an emotion Mia couldn't identify. "She told me her mother painted it for her. I never believed her." He reached out a trembling hand and traced the air just above the signature in the corner. "Yvette." "You've done good work, Miss Russo," he said quietly, finally looking at her, and in his ancient, cold eyes she saw the barest flicker of respect. He then turned his gaze on Marcus Vance, and the ice returned, colder than before. "As for you, Marcus, you would do well to remember that sentiment, as you call it, is what builds a legacy. Profit is merely what maintains it. Don't ever confuse the two." He turned and left the room without another word. Marcus Vance's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. He shot Mia a look of pure venom before following the old man out. Mia stood there, her heart pounding. She had survived. More than that, she had won. Julian walked over to her, his expression unreadable. I apologize for his behavior. Marcus has always been a brute. It's all right, she said, though she was still shaking. No, it's not, he said, his voice low. But you handled it, just like you did at the restaurant. He was standing closer now, the space between them charged with an unspoken energy. You're remarkable, Mia. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, and a jolt, sharp and undeniable, shot through her. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the carefully constructed walls between employer and employee, between Billionaire and Waitress, crumbled into dust. The air grew thick with possibility, with the terrifying, exhilarating promise of something more. He started to lean in, his gaze dropping to her lips, and Mia felt her own body responding, leaning toward him, wanting him. Then his phone buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound that shattered the moment. He pulled back, his expression shuttered once more. He looked at the screen, and a dark cloud passed over his face. I have to take this, he said, his voice strained. It's the board, there's a problem, a financial discrepancy in the Q3 logistics reports. He walked away, leaving Mia standing alone with the ghost of a kiss on the air and a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. A financial discrepancy. The words echoed in her mind, connecting with the other dissonant chord she had noted before. The painting that shouldn't have been there, hanging in the office of the man who had just tried to destroy her. The tension in the office for the next few days was palpable. Julian was consumed by the financial problem, locked in meetings with auditors and executives. Mia saw him only in passing, the brief warmth that had sparked between them seemingly extinguished by the cold realities of his corporate world. She buried herself in her work, the archives a welcome refuge from the storm brewing on the 80th floor. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. While she worked, her mind kept returning to Marcus Vance, his open contempt, his lavish lifestyle that even a senior VP salary couldn't fully justify, and that painting. Storm over the Palisades. An inventory error. It had to be. But her instincts, honed by years of spotting the tiniest imperfections, screamed that it was more. Driven by a need to know, she started digging. In her own time, after hours, she used the Foundation's research subscriptions to look into the artist, Jasper Finch. She discovered he was part of a specific circle of artists who, for a brief period in the 1870s, experimented with a new, rare pigment imported from France called cerulean blue. It gave their skies a unique, luminous quality, but was notoriously expensive and fell out of favor quickly. His most famous works were all noted for their use of this specific, vibrant blue. The next day, she made an excuse to walk past Vance's office. The door was ajar. The painting hung on the far wall, dark and imposing. The sky in the painting was a murky grey blue, not the vibrant cerulean she had read about. It was a good painting, but it felt dull, lifeless. That evening, she found what she was looking for in a dusty box of acquisition records from 1978. It was the original bill of sale for Storm Over the Palisades, purchased by Thorn Industries from a reputable gallery. Attached was a high-resolution photograph of the painting from the time of purchase. Mia zoomed in on the image. The sky in the original photograph was breathtaking, a swirling, dynamic expanse of brilliant, luminous cerulean blue. The painting in Marcus Vance's office was a fake. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a clerical error. This was fraud. Vance had swapped the real painting with a high-quality forgery, and, she suspected, sold the original on the black market. The inventory record had been deliberately falsified to show the real one was in storage, where no one would ever think to look for it. And if he had done it with this one, How many others had he replaced? The financial discrepancy Julian was chasing might not be in the logistics reports at all. It might be hanging on the walls. She had to tell Julian. But how? She had no concrete proof, only a color mismatch and a deep suspicion. Vance was a powerful man, a fixture in the company for 30 years. Accusing him without irrefutable evidence would be career suicide. He would paint her as a vindictive, social-climbing nobody, and he would be believed. She needed more. She needed to see the inventory records for every piece of art Vance had ever been involved in acquiring or moving. Records that Clara Vance, his loyal niece, controlled. The next morning, she approached Clara's desk, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Clara, I'm sorry to bother you, but in my research on Eleanor Vance Thorne, I found evidence that she advised the company on several art acquisitions in the 80s. To track her influence, I'd need to review the full acquisition and movement logs for the entire corporate collection from 1980 to the present." Clara looked up from her computer, her expression a mask of bored superiority. "That's an absurd request. Those are sensitive financial documents. You're an archival consultant, not an auditor." "I understand," Mia said, keeping her voice steady. "But Mr. Thorne, Julian, asked me to be thorough in documenting the family's complete influence on the company's culture. Eleanor's role as an artistic advisor is a key part of that. I can't complete the project he assigned me without them." She was banking on Clara's rigid adherence to hierarchy and her fear of being seen to obstruct Julian's direct orders. It was a gamble. Clara stared at her for a long moment, her eyes narrowed. "Fine," she snapped, clearly displeased. "But I want a signed request form detailing the exact scope of your research, and every file you access will be logged." "Of course," Mia said, trying to hide her relief. For 2 days, Mia lived in a world of inventory numbers, shipping manifests, and insurance valuations. She cross-referenced every painting Vance had ever handled with auction records and scholarly articles. A pattern began to emerge. 4 other paintings, all valuable, mid-tier works like the Jasper Finch, had been moved into deep storage under Vance's authorization over the last 5 years. All 4 were by artists known for specific, hard-to-replicate techniques or materials. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, swapping out authentic pieces for convincing fakes and selling the originals for untraceable cash. The combined value was in the millions, more than enough to create the discrepancy that had the board in a panic. She compiled her findings into a detailed, meticulously sourced report. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when she cross-referenced the dates of the art movements with Vance's personal travel records, which she found in an old executive expense report. Each time a painting was moved to storage, Vance had taken a business trip to Switzerland or the Cayman Islands. Armed with her dossier, she requested a meeting. He agreed to see her late that evening, after the auditors, with their somber faces and funereal suits, had finally departed. The 81st floor was a realm of profound silence, the city below a glittering, indifferent nebula. She found him not in his vast office, but in the study she now considered her own, standing before the window that overlooked the sleeping giant of Central Park. He held a glass of amber liquid, but it seemed less a comfort than a prop, something for his hand to do. The exhaustion radiating from him was a tangible force, a gravity that seemed to bend the very light in the room. "They found nothing," he said, his voice a low rasp of defeat, not even turning to look at her. "The numbers add up. The assets are accounted for on the balance sheets. They're suggesting a complex software error in the quarterly reporting, a ghost in the machine. A multi-million-dollar ghost." He took a slow sip of the whiskey. "The board thinks I'm on a witch hunt. that I've inherited my grandfather's paranoia, but not his instinct. It's not a ghost, Julian, Mia said, her own voice steady, a quiet counterpoint to his despair. She walked forward and placed the heavy, meticulously organized binder on the great oak table between them. The solid thud it made was the only sound in the room. And it's not in the machine. It's been hanging on the walls, hiding in plain sight. He turned then, his grey eyes, clouded with fatigue and frustration, slowly focusing on her, and then on the binder. A flicker of something, not yet hope, but a weary curiosity, stirred in their depths. "What is this?" "This," she said, tapping the cover, "is the story of how Marcus Vance has been systematically defrauding Thorn Industries for over a decade. It's a story told not in numbers, but in pigment and provenance." For the next hour, under the soft glow of a single desk lamp, she became a storyteller, a scholar laying bare a hidden history. She guided him through the labyrinth of her research, her voice calm and precise. She didn't just present facts, she wove a narrative. She showed him the high-resolution archival photograph of Jasper Finch's storm over the Palisades, its sky a swirling, luminous cerulean, and placed it beside a discreet photo she'd taken of the forgery in Vance's office, its sky a dead, muddy grey. She explained the unique, almost microscopic brushwork of a Dutch still life, a technique impossible to replicate without modern magnification, and showed him how the forgery lacked its signature texture. She laid out the acquisition records, the shipping manifests falsified to show movement to a deep storage facility that was, in reality, a small, rented locker in New Jersey. She connected the timelines, matching Vance's business trips to Zurich and Geneva with the exact dates that major auction houses recorded the private, anonymous sales of paintings that bore an uncanny resemblance to the Thorn Corporation's missing treasures. The evidence was overwhelming, a tapestry of deceit, woven with such meticulous detail that Julian's expression shifted from skepticism to a stunned silence, then to a cold, crystalline rage that seemed to lower the temperature of the room. When she finished, he didn't speak for a full minute. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her, the muscles in his shoulders corded with tension. The city lights reflected in the glass, overlaying his silhouette like a fractured crown. "He used our history against us," Julian said, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "Our legacy. He knew no one would question the art. It was just part of the furniture, a symbol of stability. He turned it into his personal bank." He turned back to face her, and the raw admiration in his eyes was so intense it was like a physical touch. "I hired you to catalogue my family's past. I never imagined you'd unearth the rot in its present." He picked up the binder, weighing it in his hands as if it were a weapon. "I'm calling a special meeting of the board for 10 a.m. tomorrow. I need you there." "Me?" The word was a breath of pure panic. The idea of standing before those powerful, intimidating figures, of being the focal point of their collective scrutiny, was terrifying. "Yes, you." His tone was absolute, leaving no room for argument. "This isn't my discovery, Mia. It's yours. You built this case from a single, dissonant detail. You will be the one to present it." He crossed the space between them, his anger now tempered by something softer, more protective. He saw the fear in her eyes. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Good," he said, his hand finding hers, his fingers wrapping around her cold ones with a surprising warmth. "It means you understand the stakes, but you are not walking into that room as a waitress from Queens or as my archival consultant. You are walking in as the sharpest mind in this entire building, and I will be right beside you." The boardroom the next morning was a chamber of ice and tension. Arthur Thorne presided from the head of the long mahogany table, his face a granite mask of grim neutrality. The other board members, a pantheon of old money and corporate power, whispered among themselves, their glances toward Julian a mixture of pity and impatience. Marcus Vance was the picture of relaxed confidence. He lounged in his chair, a bespoke suit clinging perfectly to his frame, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He caught Mia's eye as she entered, and gave her a look of such withering contempt it nearly buckled her knees. He believed this was Julian's public execution. He had no idea he was attending his own. Julian began, his voice cutting through the murmurs with cold precision. "We have been searching for a financial hemorrhage. We believed it was a failure of our accounting systems. We were wrong. The theft was analog, not digital. It has been happening for years, not in our ledgers but on our walls." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. Then he nodded to Mia. "Ms. Russo has uncovered the truth. The floor is hers." Every head swiveled towards her. The combined force of their attention was a physical weight. Her mouth was dust, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She took a breath, her fingers finding the small, smooth worry stone she kept in her pocket. She looked at Julian. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable but for a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. She began to speak. She didn't use the podium but stood at the side of the table, moving with a quiet confidence she didn't feel. She projected the images onto the large screen, the vibrant originals beside the dull forgeries. She didn't just show them. She taught them. She became the expert, the art historian, her voice gaining strength and clarity as she delved into her subject. She explained the chemistry of cerulean blue, the unique craquelure of aged oil on canvas, the telltale signs of a modern forgery attempting to mimic historical techniques. She watched Marcus Vance as she spoke. She catalogued his reactions like she would a piece of silver. The initial smirk faded to boredom, then to irritation as she continued. The irritation curdled into disbelief when she presented the falsified shipping manifests. Disbelief collapsed into a stark, naked panic when the Swiss auction records appeared on screen, timed perfectly with his travel expenses. A sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. His confident posture crumbled. "This is an outrage, a complete fabrication," Vance finally exploded, his voice a strangled roar as he slammed a fist on the table. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. "This is a pathetic fantasy concocted by a vengeful little nobody. She holds a grudge, and she's trying to frame me to secure her place at the side of her new billionaire benefactor." The room erupted into chaos. The accusation, ugly and personal, hung in the air, a poison dart aimed directly at her credibility. "Are you denying the evidence, Marcus?" Julian's voice sliced through the noise, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "Of course I deny it. It's conjecture. A fairy tale. It is her word, the word of a hired girl against mine, a senior vice president who has given 30 years of his life to this company." A knot of ice formed in Mia's stomach. He was right. In a way, it was circumstantial. They had no confession, no photograph of him making a trade. He would sow doubt, claim he was framed, that she was a fantasist, a gold digger. But then she saw it. A tiny detail she had logged in her mind days ago, but hadn't known how to use. A detail that was not on a screen or in a file. It was on Marcus Vance himself. She held up a hand, a quiet gesture that, astonishingly, silenced the room. She turned her gaze fully on Vance, her expression one of calm, academic curiosity. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and steady. "That's a beautiful suit. Brioni, I imagine?" The The Super 180's wool has a magnificent drape. Vance blinked, thrown off guard by the non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything? He sneered. Just an observation, she continued, taking a slow step toward him. I also observed you in the hallway 3 days ago, just after you'd left your office. You brushed against a catering cart. A tiny drop of coffee splashed onto your left cufflink. She looked directly at his cuff. You're a meticulous man. I'm sure you had it cleaned immediately. He instinctively glanced down at his pristine, diamond-studded cufflink. So? I'm not a slob. No, you're not, Mia agreed softly. But here's the thing about restoring 150-year-old paintings, Mr. Vance. It's messy work. Not the forgery, of course. That would be done in a clean, modern studio. But handling the original, moving it, crating it, old canvas sheds, dust, microscopic fragments of pigment, varnish, things that get into the weave of a fabric and are almost impossible to entirely remove, even with the best dry cleaning. She paused, letting every eye in the room fixate on the man now frozen in his chair. The Jasper Finch painting, she said, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper, was famous for its sky, a unique, vibrant cerulean blue. If one were to look at the cuff of your suit jacket right now, under a magnifying glass, or perhaps even a microscope, I wonder what color fragments we might find deep in the fibers of that very expensive wool. It was a bluff, a spectacular, audacious, magnificent bluff. She had no idea if a single molecule of pigment remained on his suit. But she knew the science, and more importantly, she knew the man. She knew his arrogance, and she knew the cold terror of a guilty conscience. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. Every person in the room held their breath, watching Marcus Vance. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. His eyes, wide with horror, darted from Mia to Arthur Thorne, and back again. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. In that crushing silence, his guilt was screamed from the rooftops. He didn't need to confess. His body had already done it for him. It was Arthur Thorne who finally broke the spell. He had been watching Mia with an expression of utter, undisguised astonishment. He slowly turned his cold, grey gaze upon Marcus. "Get out," he said, his voice a low, lethal rumble. "Security will escort you from the building. Your assets are frozen as of this moment. You will speak only to our lawyers." He then looked back at Mia, his eyes holding hers across the vast expanse of the table. "Miss Russo," he said, and for the first time she heard a note of genuine, unadulterated respect in his voice. "It appears your eye for detail is the single greatest asset this company possesses." The aftermath was a controlled demolition. Marcus Vance was erased from the company with surgical precision. The scandal was contained, the stolen millions quietly pursued by a phalanx of lawyers. Clara Vance tendered her resignation via email that afternoon. A single, sterile sentence. The old guard had not just been broken, it had been shattered. That evening, Mia stood with Julian in the study again. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the strange, hollow echo of victory. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, and a current, warm and electric, passed between them. "He called you a gold digger," Julian said quietly, swirling the liquid in his glass. "He tried to put you in a box, to reduce you to a caricature he could understand and dismiss." "People have been trying to put me in boxes my whole life," Mia said, taking a sip. The whiskey burned a welcome path down her throat. The quiet girl, the poor girl, the waitress. They were all wrong, he said, his voice raw with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. He set his glass down and took hers, placing it beside his. He took both of her hands in his. Maya, what I feel for you. It started that night in the alley. Yes. But it wasn't pity. It was recognition. It was like I had spent my entire life in a room full of forgeries, and I suddenly, finally, saw something authentic. He searched her eyes, his own vulnerable and wide open. Vance's accusation, about us. It was poison, but there was a kernel of truth in it that I can't ignore. I am your employer. There is a power dynamic here that is undeniable and unfair. Julian, no, let me say this, he insisted. I can't fix that imbalance overnight with a declaration. Love isn't a magic wand. But I can promise you this. I will spend every day earning the right to stand beside you, not as your boss or your benefactor, but as your partner. I love your mind, Amelia Russo. I love your strength, your integrity. The rest, we can figure out the rest together. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to trace paths down her cheeks. They weren't tears of joy or sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming release. I think, she whispered, her voice thick. We already have. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of fairy tale passion, but something far more real and infinitely more precious. It was hesitant, searching, a question and an answer all at once. It was a kiss of profound respect, of shared exhaustion, and of the quiet, dawning certainty of two people who had found in each other a truth more valuable than any masterpiece. Their life didn't become a headline. It was built in the quiet, unobserved moments that followed. A few weeks later, Mia found Clara Vance packing the last of her things from a small, temporary office. The other woman didn't look up. He was my family, Clara said, her voice brittle. He got me my first internship here. I owed him my loyalty. Loyalty is a choice, Mia said softly. It shouldn't be a debt. Clara finally looked up, her severe face etched with a complex mixture of resentment and a sliver of something that looked like grudging respect. You won't last. This world, it chews up people like you. Maybe, Mia replied, offering a small, sad smile. Or maybe it's time this world learned to chew on something else. Elena's treatment continued, a slow, arduous journey of small victories and frustrating setbacks. There was no miracle. But now, when Mia sat by her mother's side, the crushing weight of financial terror was gone, replaced by the simple, profound challenge of being present. Julian was often there, not as a billionaire, but as a man who learned to make Elena's favorite tea and who listened, truly listened, to her stories about a life lived far from the Thorn Tower. Mia did not quit her job. She redefined it. With a new charter approved by Julian and a visibly impressed Arthur, she became the director of the Thorn Foundation's Cultural Assets and Historical Archives. She instituted a scholarship, funded by the sale of one of the recovered, less significant paintings for students in art restoration. She was its first, anonymous recipient, a fact only she and Julian knew. A year to the day after the boardroom confrontation, she stood on a scaffold in a new, state-of-the-art restoration studio Julian had built for her on the 79th floor. It was her sanctuary, a space filled with light and the scent of linseed oil and turpentine. On the easel before her was "Storm over the Palisades." The real one finally returned after a long legal battle. She had spent months carefully, painstakingly removing the yellowed varnish of a century. She dipped a cotton swab in her cleaning solution and made a small, circular motion across the canvas. As the grime dissolved, a patch of the sky beneath was revealed. A brilliant, breathtaking, luminous cerulean blue. It was like watching a star being born. She heard the door open and close softly. She didn't need to turn around. She felt his presence, a quiet, steady anchor in her universe. He came to stand beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his tie gone for the day. He watched her work, his gaze moving from her focused expression to the vibrant patch of color on the canvas. "It's incredible," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It's like you're bringing it back from the dead." Mia paused, looking from the reclaimed, brilliant sky to the man who had seen her value when she was polishing forgotten silver in the dark. She thought of the journey, of the fear and the fight, of the quiet strength she had found within herself. "No," she said, a slow, certain smile spreading across her face as she turned back to her work, ready to reveal the rest of the masterpiece. "It was always there. You just have to know how to look."